Welcome to You Have My Sword. Are you guys ready for the shortest episode ever? Because we don't know shit about this sword. Here's what we do know. Let's talk about it. Before we get into it though, if you like learning about how Middle-earth came to be, check out our other show, Settle the Stars. Host Alexander Wynn takes you on a journey through the solar system to discuss process of survival on different planets. If you're curious about space, science, terraforming, or just want to check in to see if Pluto is still a planet or not, Settle the Stars has new episodes every Friday wherever you listen to podcasts. We'll connect about swords after you listen to this dope trailer.
Hey folks, after 14 months of 2020 chaos, the Settle the Stars podcast is finally returning. Tune in at youtube.com/Edgeworks Entertainment or on your favorite podcast platform for weekly episodes about space exploration, cutting-edge science, and what exactly it will take for humanity to settle the stars.
Welcome back. Now that we're back on Amon, let's talk about my favorite subject, swords. Glamdring was most widely known as Gandalf's sword. Most of us remember Gandalf discovering Glamdring among other weapons, including Orcrist and Sting, in a troll cave during The Hobbit. Glamdring, as most simple items in Middle-earth, has a far more in-depth and important history than meets the eye. We learned a bit about how simple objects in Tolkien's world have more lore than the average fantasy object in Episode 6, The Phial of Galadriel. Glamdring, also called the Foe Hammer and the Beater, was a hand-and-a-half sword forged by Turgon, the Elven King of Gondolin, during the First Age. So, to reiterate, this elvish blade is old as fuck. For context, a hand-and-a-half sword is a modern term to describe bastard swords, but it is used in reference to long swords primarily. The hand-and-a-half blade is used for thrusting, and this sword can be used with either one or both hands, and usually has a blade of about 22 to 30 inches long. Now, Glamdring survived roughly 6,500 years from the fall of Gondolin in First Age 510, all the way to its eventual rediscovery in Third Age 2941. In that period, it traveled from Gondolin far to the east. Much mystery surrounds this feat, but Elrond reasoned that Glamdring, along with Orcrist and Sting, was plundered again and again, or carried off to the Misty Mountains soon after the fall of Gondolin. Thus, after surviving the deluge of Beleriand in the War of Wrath, it ended up in a troll's cave in the Trollshaws of Eriador. Glamdring was originally born by Turgon. He wielded it during the fall of Gondolin, and the orcs named it Beater and fled at the very sight of it. Even up until the Third Age, orcs of the Misty Mountains knew of this legendary sword, so it must have done some fucking damage. Remember when Bilbo and the dwarves come across the Goblin King and his crew, and the goblins go absolutely apeshit when they see Beater? We see this reaction emphasized in both the animated and live-action productions of The Hobbit, just reinstating the history and reputation of this blade, passed down in goblin lore and quite possibly through genetic memory. No other tales mention the actions of the sword, and it is unknown what happened to it during the fall of Gondolin. Turgon perished as the Tower of the King fell on top of him, but the fate of Glamdring is never specified. During the siege of the city, Turgon watched most of the battle from his tower, sending troops where needed. Once the king ordered the survivors to leave the city, he climbed to the topmost pinnacle of the White Tower and cried, "Great is the victory of the Noldoli." While the exiles leave, the house of the king gathered around the base of the king's tower to fight until the end. Unfortunately for Turgon, a dragon destroyed the base of the tower, killing Turgon, leaving Glamdring essentially missing in the battle. And I do believe this dragon to be what is cited as the Fire Drake of Gondolin. Can't just casually mention a dragon without throwing some respect on their name, you know what I mean? Okay, so, cut to 6,000 years later, we get the iconic moment where Gandalf finds it in a troll's cave in Eriador in Third Age 2941, obviously alongside Orcrist and what was later called Sting. And he claimed Glamdring for himself, which is a solid choice. And fun fact, the trolls they encounter actually have names, If you remember that they do encounter 3 trolls, and their names are Bert, Tom, and Bill Huggins. This is, insanely enough, a real fact and not something I made up, I promise you. Those are legitimately their names, and if you go back and look at them in the films, you're kind of like, oh yeah, that actually, that makes sense. Okay, with Glamdring, Gandalf slew the Great Goblin in Goblin Town before he and Thorin Oakenshield routed his underlings. Gandalf continued to use Glamdring through the events of the War of the Ring. Gandalf knows his way around a sword for sure, but as a god wizard, does he really need it? Or does he subscribe to the cardinal rule that the sword simply looks cool? Because he looked cool as fuck with it at the battle at the Black Gate, for sure. Glamdring, along with Orcrist, its mate, are described in The Hobbit as having beautiful scabbards and jeweled hilts. And Glamdring was referred to by Elrond as faux hammer that the King of Gondolin once wore. In Unfinished Tales, one of the footnotes mentions that the sword of Turgon was white and gold in a ruel bone sheath. Ruel bone essentially meaning ivory. Like all High Elven swords, Glamdring was like Orcrist and Sting in that, being the work of elvish smiths in the Elder Days, these swords shone with a cold light if any orcs were near at hand. Now, some of you may be wondering, so do all elven blades glow blue when orcs are around? And the answer is, well, no, not really. We know that Glamdring and Orcrist do glow, as Sting does, although it's not depicted in the films, but it's cited in Tolkien's writing here. Gandalf took out his sword again, and again it flashed in the dark by itself. It burned with a rage that made it gleam if goblins were about. Now it was bright as blue flame for delight in the killing of the great lord of the cave. The goblins came scurrying around the corner in full cry and found Goblin Cleaver and Faux Hammer shining cold and bright in their astonished eyes. But now with Glamdring glowing significantly blue here, after Gandalf uses it to kill the Goblin King, that could have referred to its brightness in that specific situation, where he slayed the Goblin King. Everywhere else in Tolkien's writings, Glamdring's color when glowing is always described as white, a cold white. Only Sting glows blue consistently, and it's theorized that this is because this dagger may have been used for scouting purposes. In Peter Jackson's The Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit movie series, Glamdring is one of Gandalf's primary weapons, the other being, obviously, his staff. As mentioned above, it has runes engraved in Cirth script. Weta Workshop designer Richard Taylor stated that this was done with the intention that elves put magic inscriptions on the blade to strengthen it. This idea is repeated with various other weapons, such as Anduril. In the Hobbit trilogy, Gandalf is able to recognize it as a sword of Gondolin, but Elrond identifies it by name. The design of the blade is also different to the elvish curved swords that we normally see, likely because the blade was made in the First Age, where sword design was a bit different. While it does not glow in the films, it is still powerful, especially in Gandalf's fight with the Balrog. It is strong enough to pierce the Balrog's flesh without damage, and is used by Gandalf to direct attacks of lightning, which enable him to vanquish the Balrog. In the movies, Glamdring is inscribed with runes in the Elven language. These runes say, Turgon Aran Gondolin, Tortha Gar Amatha Glamdring, Vego Glamdring Gudayelo, Dam on Glamhoth, which translates to Turgon, King of Gondolin, wields, has, and holds the sword of Glamdring, foe of Morgoth's realm, hammer of the orcs. Now, this is interesting, but this inscription is actually not from Tolkien's writings. Tolkien only says in The Hobbit that the names of the swords were given in the runes. A problem also with this inscription is that it is in Sindarin, while Tolkien stated late in his life that Turgon had re-established Quenya as the language of his household in Gondolin, which really is just an interesting little fact for ya. And with that, that's about all I've got for my favorite Middle-earth sword. Glamdring. If you have any other cool Glamdring facts, let us know on Twitter or on Instagram. Now, at the end of this episode, I'd really like to point you guys towards Andy Serkis this episode. We know and love him as the voice of Gollum, and his reading of The Hobbit is incredible. I've probably listened to this audiobook 6 to 7 times as background noise while I work. He's also currently recording a reading of the trilogy as well, which will no doubt be phenomenal. And I believe those are available for pre-order as we speak. If you are looking to do a reread of the series or The Hobbit but don't have time, no worries and no shame there. Audiobooks are absolutely the move, and Andy Serkis fucking slays his reading of The Hobbit. What's delightful about Andy Serkis reading The Hobbit was he did it during the height of coronavirus when we were all pretty seriously locked indoors, and he did it not only for fun, netting roughly 650k people watching the reading live, but he also raised a ton of money for 2 different charities along the way. He started streaming his reading of The Hobbit at 10 a.m. on Friday and finished the fantasy classic 11 hours later. Check it out and give audiobooks a chance if you feel you're too busy to read. It counts, no audiobook shame here at You Have My Sword. And as always, you can head to youhavemyswordpodcast.com for links to our socials and Patreon. If you become a patron or support through my Ko-fi page, you get access to the You Have My Sword Discord, where we love to collectively scream no longer into the void, but to each other. And as always, you have my sword. I know. Do you want to make your podcast debut? No, might as well.
Edgeworks Nebula.